On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to continue our study in the book of the Revelation. Now, from time to time, we have written about the book of Revelation, and in each monthly issue, we've put a chapter. Well, in our June 2002 magazine, we have chapter 9 of Revelation, and we talked about the fifth trumpet on our last broadcast. Today, we're going to continue in this ninth chapter with the sixth trumpet. Gary Stimman is here to discuss with me the second woe and the sixth trumpet.
And J.R., I'll begin by reading Revelation 9, 13 and 14. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before the Lord, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now, we're going to discover today that the river Euphrates has quite a great deal of prophetic significance. But before that, let's begin in the first verse, which I read, and let's speak about the four horns of the golden altar.
You know, Gary, the golden altar is pictured in chapter 5, again in chapter 8, and now in chapter 10. And it all seems to be related to the fifth seal and the seventh seal. In fact, if you'll recall, after the first four trumpets, this eagle angel, one of the four beasts around the altar, pronounces woe, woe, woe through these trumpets, the fifth trumpet, sixth trumpet, and seventh trumpet. Now, he is the one who evidently introduced the pale horse, the horse whose sidekick is hell, and the name of this horseman is death, and they go across the earth decimating the population. So we have here in the sixth trumpet, a third of the population die. And so we seem to have a relationship between the fourth horseman of the apocalypse and the resulting devastation, which, of course, shows us the souls under the altar of incense, the altar of incense in the fifth seal. And then when the seventh trumpet, or seventh seal is broken, we have the high priest going to the altar of incense, taking fire and casting it to the earth. Mm-hmm. Now we have a voice from this altar. And so this altar seems to figure very prominently in these judgments that are coming upon the earth at this particular time.
Indeed, and this altar, I think you would agree, corresponds to the altar of incense. That is, traditionally, in the tabernacle days, the altar of incense represented the prayers of the saints. The high priest would go in, he would place incense on it, the smoke would rise and go into the Holy of Holies, symbolizing the prayers of the saints. And you know, that may be what we're seeing here. We're seeing the realization of generations of prayers by the saints saying, how long, O Lord, until the great judgment falls? And now we're seeing the great judgment.
And the fire casts upon the earth, and here comes the trumpets, first trumpet, second trumpet, third trumpet, fourth trumpet, and these decimate the ecology of the earth. And then the fifth trumpet, we have these demonic locusts that come out and invade the earth and torment the wicked, though they do not slay them. Yes. But when we come to this trumpet, men are slain, a third of the population of the planet. And Gary, the descriptions here are awesome. The voice from this altar says, loose the four angels that are bound in the great river Euphrates. Let's talk about the Euphrates for a moment, Gary.
Well, it's fascinating that early on in the Bible, in Genesis 2:14, we have the river Euphrates called the fourth river. There were four rivers that watered the Garden of Eden in the days of Adam and Eve, and one of them is called the fourth river, and the fourth river is Euphrates. And then in the 15th chapter of Genesis, when God awards the land grant to Abraham, he gives as the western border of the promised land the river Euphrates. And we come here to Revelation, J.R. We have four angels bound in the great river Euphrates. We have the number 4 associated very strongly with the river Euphrates. 4 is the traditional number of the kingdom.
Yeah. Now you remember in Daniel chapter 12, Daniel sees this river and one standing on either bank and someone out in the middle of the river. This appears to be perhaps the river Euphrates as well, though we may not have the exact name there. But Daniel is in Babylon and he sees them upon this river because the river figures very prominently. This area of the Euphrates harkens back to the dawn of civilization. I've written this in my article for the magazine. To the creation of Adam. Some modern scholars suggest that Eden once lay at the mouth of the Euphrates. In fact, the river is listed as one of the 4 that ran through the garden, as you said, Gary. It's the area where the serpent beguiled Eve. It's the area of the Tower of Babel, from which comes the modern Mystery Babylon. And this was the area of, for example, the prince of the kingdom of Persia in Daniel chapter 10, who waged war against Michael. And the interesting thing is, Gary, the battle wasn't over. This angel told Daniel that he had to go back and fight some more. And so the prince of Persia may be one of these angels bound in the river Euphrates.
J.R., that's very possible, I think. And the 15th verse talks about those 4 angels. This is the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the 3rd part of men. So these are evil angels. These angels have a mission and a duty, and it's not pretty.
Yeah. Now I want to read to you what Joseph Sy said about this. I think it's a classic description of this Euphrates River area. That's where Eden was. This is what Joseph Sy writes. It was in this locality that the first murder was committed. It was in this region that the great apostasies, both before and after the flood, had their centers. It was in this region that Israel's most oppressive enemies resided, and that the Jews were compelled to drag out the long and weary years of their great captivity. It was in this region that the great oppressive world powers took their commencement. It is the region where all the world's beginnings were made, where man first saw the light, first sinned, fell from his first estate, was banished from paradise, and introduced all earth's miseries, where Satan first alighted upon our planet, won his first triumphs, and first set his foul agencies against man in operation. Well, the Euphrates River area just happens to be the heart and soul of Islam today. And Gary, with Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, all of those rogue countries, it looks like the world is about to see real devastation.
J.R., think about the Euphrates for a moment. It's literally a prophetic boundary line. You know, the first Hebrews, Abraham being the first Hebrew, came across the river to the promised land. And you know that when he crossed the river, the word Hebrew means those from across the river. That river was the river Euphrates. It figures so prominently in prophecy and in history, and it flows all the way from Turkey, as J.R. mentioned, or clear down to the Persian Gulf. It seems to be pivotal in today's Islamic brotherhood.
Now, let's compare it for a moment with the 6th vial. This is the 6th trumpet. Listen to the 6th vial, judgment. Chapter 16 of Revelation, verse 12. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river, you guessed it, Euphrates. And the waters thereof were dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. So, this river Euphrates seems to be very important to the ongoing battles, the wars of the tribulation period. And one other thing I want to mention here, Gary, he says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon. Now, a frog is something that lives in a river, so there seems to be an association here. And these frog-like creatures just happen to be demons as well. It's interesting, there are 3 here and there are 4 over here. I don't know why. By the way, while we're walking through this muddy region, let me just read to you what Joseph Sy said about it in his book published in 1900. We here come upon ground which has been very trying to expositors, the great battleground of conflicting systems and the burial ground of many a fond conceit. Alford, he's quoting another theologian, has given it as his opinion that the chapter on which we now enter is undoubtedly one of the most difficult in the whole apocalypse. I guess that's enough said, Gary. In other words, don't expect to find all the answers. Nobody before us has. And so it is not our ultimate goal to find every answer, even though we'd love to, wouldn't we?
Oh, yes, we would.
So when we get to this 16th chapter here, and the sixth vial is poured out, 3 unclean frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon. They're spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth, the whole world, and gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. He gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Now, I don't know that this sixth trumpet is Armageddon, but it sure sounds like it. If it's not, it's certainly a part of it, because we've got some very strange things going on here, and we'll tell you about them when we return in just a moment. The sixth trumpet sounds. A voice from the four horns of the altar say, "Loose the 4 demonic angels in the river Euphrates. They're going to bring the world down." And the interesting thing about this, Gary, is that the number of the horsemen were 200 million. There were only about 200 million population in the whole world in AD 96 when John wrote this chapter. Until today, there has been no army in history of that many. Now, Mao Zedong said that he could field an army, but he didn't. I mean, maybe he could. It's possible today, but even today, there's no army with that many in it.
Now, China has about 1.5 billion people, and 200 million men out of 1.5 billion is not really all that many.
And but we don't even know they're going to be from China.
No, we don't.
We just know they're kings of the East, and we don't know exactly what East. Is it the Far East? Is it China, Japan, Far Eastern nations, or is it Islam?
It could be Islam, J.R., because the Euphrates River runs down through Islam to the Persian Gulf. And surrounding it, we have Iraq, we have Iran, we have Syria very close by. The Persian Gulf, of course, the waters of the Persian Gulf mark off the eastern boundary of Saudi Arabia. So really all around this river, we have the Arab Brotherhood.
And it's interesting that this waters of the Euphrates are dried up. Now, there is a dam on the Euphrates River in Turkey, and they control the flow of the water in the Euphrates. It is possible that Turkey could have something to do with shutting off the water, draining the river until, you know, these people are in, shall we say, Iraq, are very angry.
Very angry indeed. In fact, there's been a long-standing battle over water in the area, and the Turks, of course, being Islamic, are fighting it out, kind of an internecine warfare with their Islamic brothers. So, but somehow that river is going to be dried up, and you know, this seems supernatural.
Supernatural. I want you to explain that, but first let me just tell you that concerning this 200 million, there are over 1 billion Muslims in the world today. So even from their ranks, we could see the possibility of an Islamic army with 200 billion. Now, this supernatural.
It's supernatural in the sense that the 4 angels have been bound there. The Euphrates, ever since the days, literally, of Noah, when he came down from the mountains of Ararat, which are the headwaters of the Euphrates, by the way, that river's just been flowing, and it's been flowing for thousands of years, and those angels apparently have been locked into it. And when they're loosed, it dries up. There's something funny going on there.
I don't know in what metaphysical sense these 4 angels are loosed, but by decree of heaven, they are loosed, and they are not nice. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, you mentioned the possibility, there being 4, that they might represent the kingdoms that have governed the world. Could these be not only the prince of Persia, which we saw in the book of Daniel, could it be the prince, the demonic creature behind the rise of Babylon? What about the Greek Empire and perhaps even the Roman Empire. You know, Alexander the Great, the head of the Greek Empire, tried to commit suicide by jumping in the Euphrates River.
And there it is again.
So who knows, maybe whoever it was that possessed him ended up bound in the Euphrates. I'm just speculating here. We are not trying to be dogmatic, but it's kind of interesting that everything centers around the Euphrates. Now, let's talk about these horses for a moment. I saw horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone. The heads of the horses were heads as the heads of lions. That's metaphoric. And out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. Now, Gary, this could be a mechanical, mechanized war.
And J.R., I have no doubt that it is mechanized, because that's the age in which we live. If this occurred within the next 10 to 15 years from now, we're talking about a mechanized army. And I think in your article you did a pretty good job of comparing these horses with battlefield weapons, particularly tanks. You'd think of the rotating turret of a tank looking like a head. If you were an ancient prophet and saw that turret looking around and fire spewing out of it, brimstone, you'd say, wow, this has a head like a lion.
Yeah, this brimstone type thing could be like a mortar shell coming out of the mouth of a cannon. And if the cannon were to be pointed straight ahead, it would look like a snake-like head. If it were pointed to the back, turns around, it would look like a tail. And these snake-like tails had heads, as verse 19 says. So it's very possible that we're looking at a mechanized war, modern warfare, written in the language of 1st century John.
And also, it says, by these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. You know, fire, we're talking napalm, maybe nuclear fire. Smoke, that could be a metaphor for something chemical, like nerve gas, or smoking gas, or mustard gas, like they used in World War I. And brimstone, we're talking about flamethrowers, perhaps, or some kind of flaming chemical device. Napalm, again, comes to mind. J.R., all of this is perfectly possible.
Now, you got to understand that we're not trying to scare you, but this world is headed for war. I mean, serious war. The kind of war unlike anything World War I and World War II put forth. We're talking about millions. We're talking about billions with a B dying. So we would urge you to trust in Jesus Christ. He's your only hope. Now, Gary, the interesting thing about it is the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, wood, which can neither see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Let's talk about these, because these just happen to characterize the day in which we now live.
They really do. And let's begin with that phrase that has to do with worshiping devils. A lot of people would say, well, nobody worships devils today. Oh, I beg to differ, J.R. People do, in fact, today.
Yes, they do. This involves communication with demons, consulting them by holding seances, enchanters, wizards, witches, soothsayers, diviners, necromancers, horoscopes. Let's talk about idolatry, the use of lucky charms, images of fertility, goddesses, for deviant uses. Let's talk about murders. There's more murder today than ever before. Joseph Sykes wrote in the turn of the century, quote, infanticide will characterize society and be tolerated and passed as if no great harm were done. Gary, what a description of abortion. That was in 1900.
And he saw right into the future simply by looking at the pages of Scripture. J.R., we have then murder being accepted. And murder, by the way, in our days, sadly, is becoming accepted. People are saying, well, yes, more of them are happening, but this is just the way of the world. It's not the way of the world. It's the way of sinful man.
Yeah. Then sorceries comes from the Greek word pharmakia, referring to drugs, forbidden fruit, potions, and so on. And you know, there are new drugs out now to even stimulate a person's immoral lifestyle. Then there's fornication, all in forms of lewdness, immorality, interlinked with sorceries, of course, to subvert the sanctity of marriage. And then thefts. Nothing is sacred today. My, we must be there.
We must be there, and again, it becomes very important in these days to look toward Christ.
Yes. Think about it. Jesus must be coming soon. We'll be back in just a moment. Hope you enjoyed today's prophecy in the news. Things are really moving in Israel. There's something special, Gary, that's happened at the Western Wall.
Even as we speak, there's water coming out of it, and the chief rabbinate of Jerusalem has pronounced these as tears. The Wailing Wall is actually wailing, and they say this is a sign of the coming of Messiah.
So, you know, there are a lot of exciting things going on today. Our president has just recently suggested that there will be a Palestinian state in the year 2007. And so we must keep our eyes on Jerusalem. We don't know exactly the scenario of how things will work out, but it looks like with 9/11, we're moving quickly now toward the last great war of history, World War III. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.